What's up, YouTube? It's Akibas here. So today we'll talk about how to cost effectively get your driving license in Sweden. In my previous video, I mentioned how convenient the public transportation in Sweden is. But today we'll talk about the other aspect of convenience, that is the private convenience of having your own car. If you have your own car, of course, it's easier to get employment in Sweden because employers presume that you can easily drive to work or drive your colleagues to work or in between clients on time. The other aspect, of course, is that if you have a child, it's much easier to travel using your own car than taking public transportation. Or if you want to pick them up from school, therefore, on time, then it's easier to have a car than change buses and trams, and which takes, of course, much more time. The other thing is, of course, if you want to go and do some touring or some long distance shopping, for example, in Ullared, it is, of course, easier to have your own car. That is, you can buy more things and, of course, keep in the car boot. You know what I'm talking about. So, how are driving schools in Sweden like? Of course, from most of my experience and from most of my friends who went to Swedish driving schools, the driving schools in Sweden are quite professional, and that they try to teach you a lot of things. For example, they teach you, of course, most of the things you see in other common driving schools, like how to back up, how to position your car, how to keep good distance between the car in front of you, or how to gear up and gear down, and of course to operate a manual vehicle. But the other aspect that they also teach you is how to conserve the environment, for example, using engine braking or driving in such a way that you do not use so much fuel or do not release so much CO2 in the environment. And that is, of course, done through, not accelerating so suddenly or braking without using engine brake, as I mentioned previously. So how, therefore, can you obtain your driving license in Sweden more cost effectively? You see, there are tricks, of course. Before you get your driving license, even before you go to driving schools, you have to get to the books. That there's three driving lessons book that mostly are sold at driving schools. But you can save that money instead of going to buy these books from the driving schools by going to the public library. The public library usually has these books where you can borrow and read and try to experiment with these books and learn and exactly understand what exactly they are talking about. Of course, they're in three types, and the other book also talks about the road signs and how to gear up and how to gear down. Basically, what they ask you in driving schools. The other aspect of getting your driving license cost effectively is, of course, after you have read these books, you have to train online before you go for the test. There are websites that have dummy tests for driving schools. Not necessarily the exact questions, but they give you an array of questions that presents scenarios that may be asked at your driving test. So after you have done this, you can also obtain a driving license by using a friend. You can get your friend to act as your supervisor. Mostly, this friend must have owned a driving license for 5 years, and so they also get to take a course, and therefore they can supervise you on the road as you drive, of course. This, I think, is the most efficient way of learning because it exposes you to the road itself and how it feels, which helps to bring down the anxiety, if you're driving, of course, in the driving test. And just before you go and take your final test, go to a parking yard and reverse and park and drive and do parallel parking. This, of course, you can train for as much as you can before you go to the driving test itself. And the other way of saving, of course, cost before before you go to fail the driving test is take time. Do not rush so much to take your driving test, because here's why. Every time you fail a driving test, they keep tabs on you to see what you failed previously. And if you, of course, you failed previously, they will look at some of these points. Why did he fail? Or he failed because he didn't maneuver the car so well, or he didn't adjust his speed to other cars on the road, which is mostly a challenge for new drivers, of course. So the best way to do it is take your time. Do not rush to go and take the driving license test. Do more exercise, practice again and again until you feel so confident that you can go and pass the driving test. The other way of reducing the cost of getting a driving test is when you go and take a driving test itself, ensure that you are familiar with the roads. Usually these roads are divided. For example, in Isingen or in Mondal, you can choose, depending on the area you stay, get acquainted to the roads that they follow. Try to even take the car there and exercise and learn how exactly some of these roads are. Mostly, God forbid, they take you in Koshwagen, where there are very many trams coming from other sides. It is so hard to pass. So therefore, it's important to choose another area, that doesn't have too many traffic inconveniences like cars, trams, and buses that you need to pay attention to. Not forgetting the traffic lights too that you need to watch from all sides. And the other way of course, making sure that you pass your driving license, and that is that you reduce cost, is if all else fails, take a driving license in a town out of the urban area, mostly in smaller towns, smaller cities. In Sweden, you can take a driving license there. You can take your driving test there to ensure that you pass. The challenge with taking this driving license driving test out of town is, of course, you don't live there, you do not know the roads, and it might be easier to pass. It might be more difficult to pass rather. But these roads are advantageous because they do not have any main traffic, traffic following in these roads, of course, motor vehicle traffic. So it's easier to focus on driving itself. The only challenge that I've noticed with taking this method is usually if they ask you to drive following the road signs. So you need to be in position to read the road signs. For example, the road label, which road should you follow? That is, of course, driving with a goal to the direction that the driving instructor will instruct you to drive towards. So you need to pay attention to, of course, the plates up on the road to see where does this road lead me, where should I stop, what are some of the road signs that I need to pay attention to in the rural areas. Are there animals crossing? Are there urban roads? Are there rural roads? How should I drive on these rural roads? So that is some of the ways of making sure that you obtain your driving license, of course, cost effectively. The other way is if you fail a test, try to ask your instructor to go through some of the reasons again the next time you go to driving school. Pick some of these factors that you failed and practice them again and redo them so that you can be more confident. Obviously, if you practice well, there is no way you will fail your driving test the next time. And if you fail again, of course, then you will have to buy another packet. That's another packet that's they cost around 13,000 Swedish krona to take a whole packet of driving lessons. That might be quite expensive, but you can try all these methods before taking the bigger packet and to see if you may pass. And if you practice constantly and consistently, you will most especially pass your driving license, of course, if you use some of the methods that I mentioned before. I have also seen the way some of the Swedes take their driving license. I've seen some of the teenagers who, I think, I'm going to presume because of the language, they go at once and take the theory class and pass it, and then take their practical class and also pass it on the first try. And most of the time they haven't driven before, they haven't driven a car before. But as someone who has come from another country, you have probably driven for 10, 15 years or even more than that, but you will still fail the practical driving test. I do not know what really causes this. Maybe it's the different ways people drive in other countries, or it's the fact that the Swedish teenagers are quite really smart, so they can easily pass the driving test. Or the other fact is that maybe they have trained for a long time before going to take the driving license. But we all know how it feels, of course, to drive for the first time or even the first years. It's new, you can never drive as confidently as the person who has driven for a long time. So my question therefore is, what are some of the tricks that the Swedish people use or the teenagers use to pass their driving licenses at once? If you're such a person, can you highlight it to the other people so they can learn on how to cost effectively get their driving license? And until next time, thank you so much for watching. Subscribe to the video and have a good day.